Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I will request our CEO, Dr. Abdullah, to make a brief introduction about our center and the speaker today.
Hi, a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the event this afternoon, which is being hosted by Wadhwani Research Center for Bioengineering at IIT Bombay. We are a division of IIT Bombay, set up with funding from a not-for-profit Wadhwani Foundation. And our work is in funding early-stage deep tech, healthcare, and life sciences research, and fostering an innovation ecosystem at IIT Bombay for early-stage entrepreneurs. And among the diverse set of activities we undertake, one of them is to host events with accomplished individuals, investors, entrepreneurs from the healthcare and life sciences domain. And as part of that series, we have with us Mr. Ashok Vora. Welcome. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you.
Who will be addressing the audience on the topic of navigating the path to success, overcoming challenges for explosive growth in Indian life sciences startups. Mr. Vora has a long bio, has an accomplished career. He graduated as an engineer, worked for the nuclear industry for 10 years, and worked for IBM for about 10 years in sales and marketing. And then he went on to become an entrepreneur and develop sales and distribution network for 10 years out of Southeast Asia. And he has been associated with supporting and funding biotech startup for the last decade. His current focus as part of the Bio Combinator initiative is to develop deal flow process and a platform which provides funds and the associated expertise needed for biotech companies to become commercially viable. So they are based out of C-Camp right now. I'm sure he will go in depth into what Bio Combinator is and how they work with life sciences startups. Although they are based out of C-Camp, Bio Combinator works with entrepreneurs and startups throughout the country. And Mr. Vora will brief on exactly how Bio Combinator operates and how entrepreneurs can work with them in taking their technologies forward. With that said, I will invite Mr. Ashok Vora to take the floor and address the audience. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you, IIT Mumbai, and all the people that are actually participating in this webinar. Thank you very much. Just adding 10 seconds more, my journey into India started about 20 odd years ago. At that time, I was working for IBM, and IBM wasn't onshore. So one of our tasks was to bring IBM onshore. And this is when we found that relationship with Tata is called TISL. And when that finished, I never went back to the UK. And I decided to become an entrepreneur and started working and developing businesses in Singapore and in ASEAN at that particular time. I found India very interesting because the hurdles here seemed to me as unsurmountable. Even with a card like IBM, I still had some difficulty in understanding how to acquire clients, show benefits, and sell IBM equipment. But what I can say is that since January 1990, when I started this journey, I witnessed firsthand the step change in connectivity, communication, the development of the IT back office for global company consulting services, integration, and the creation of a global India, where the entrepreneurs of then are today on the global stage. The revolution started when entrepreneurs recognized the opportunity of using the large pool of labor in India, which understood and comprehended code and spoke English, that could be matched globally. This particular revolution gave birth to thousands of businesses, some of which today are global names. Once this process started, virtually every large IT company managed to work for one, especially that sold software from the West, had their back offices in India. which then gave rise to other local support businesses and structures. No disrespect, but this was based on a particular level of qualification as the people were concerned, who wrote code, did it better than anybody else, were highly price competitive, but we created minimal IP. The same IT companies today have moved a long, long way. So the question is there a window of opportunity today where we'll see another step change as far as India is concerned, giving rise to explosive growth? If so, what are the opportunities for the life sciences vertical? So if we do ever look at what's happening, the pundits claim that over the next 15 or 10 years, we're going to see dramatic growth at a global stage. The new challenges that face the planet also represent a business potential which some of us believe will be bigger than the IT revolution that took place 30 odd years ago. Some of these challenges, and I'm sure most of you know, are in these areas, whether it's agriculture, marine, AMR, etc. So there's lots of new initiative and businesses being born in these particular verticals. So the question is, if we reflect and talk about the India story, people have talked about the growth of India. It's true that the central government has been investing in fine institutions like IITs and CCAP and so forth over the last decade. They've got state-of-the-art ecosystems. They have some brilliant students which have been there, highly qualified. Research institute. We have a large pool of now what were earlier students as a workforce. India has the money. We are still cheaper even at this level where we have highly qualified PhDs. On the global scale, we're still cheaper than anybody else. Now, to understand how we take actually the opportunity of this to get on the global stage and create another revolution which will have the same impact that IT did for India as 30 odd years ago. So the important bit to understand, okay, in the Indian terrain is the gestation periods in life sciences or biotech are significant. And a lot of our financial institutions either don't understand or can't quantify as to what the benefits are, especially when the gestation periods are so long. The other thing that has been clearly identified for a young startup is I call it pre-seed revenue of between $200K and $1 million. It's just too difficult to get. Our family offices network, while it's starting to grow, doesn't invest in biotech at the moment. All the startups that I've met over the last 10 years, and there's some very, very good people there, but the team structures often are not well-rounded. This is a problem because our scientists who are very good actually perhaps don't fully appreciate the value of some of the other components that a young company requires to go to market. We also need to connect industry. This has happened in many countries where industry associates with research centers or universities to do their research. What we now need to do is to see how we can make that connection between industry and startups, so that startups actually focus on what industry either needs today or will need over the next 5 to 10 years in order to fuel the growth that India is expecting. So, and also the amount of money and the allocation of money that's required in the startup as to how to manage that over the runway is perhaps not fully understood by the science team initially. The other thing with a lot of this stuff is it's easy to get entrepreneurs listening to mentors who are very good. But what you actually need is to incorporate some of these facets, whether it's sales, marketing, or finance, into the structure of the team itself at an early stage. And obviously the issue becomes is if they recognize it, they can't afford it, and if they can afford it, sometimes they don't recognize it. I don't know what that squiggle on my screen is, so I apologize for that. I started entering into the biotech space, it's about 10 odd years ago, and I met up with a gentleman called Ram, who then ran C-Camp. And I met a lot of the companies over there. And I found that while I didn't understand science that well, some of these companies seemed awfully talented when I compared to some of the other countries. So I was fortunate enough that I met some people, I made some investments. I think more through luck than by design, they turned out good. And these were in the cell and gene therapy, in some cancer therapies, and some alternative proteins. So when I looked at the number of companies, and many IITs or research centers have this, where to get into there is a challenge. Out of thousands of companies, if I use NBEC as an example, who started off with 3,000 companies, got whittled down to 300, who got a Zoom call of 8 minutes, out of which 60 were selected, and probably 10 or will reach the final. So it's a rigorous selection process, and if we assume that the judges know what they're doing, we've selected the best of the best to actually come into these institutes. The question to be asked is, why are so few hitting what I call escape velocity? I use a particular yardstick for deciding success, and that's not the amount of time that one stays alive. It's the amount of money that you make and whether you can go global. Okay, so I got involved with a few companies which fortunately have done that. I got some stats on C-Camp, which I've put here in front of you as to how many companies have done, how many startups. Could they have done more companies? Could more companies have emerged? My view is the answer is yes. So the question comes is, what's missing? What's wrong? So when I analyze the early companies that I got associated with, rather than talk about what was wrong with the others, I decided to understand what was special about the ones that actually succeeded. What was the difference between them and so many of the others where I believe the science was equally good and the people were equally good. Before we go into that, I just wanted to give some names because I felt we should put some flesh on the skeleton and not just talk at 30,000 feet. These are some of the companies. Some of you may actually know them. Bugworks, String Bio, iStem, and of late Encure, and UN. If you have a look at some of the associations and the tenure of these companies and their valuations, I believe the large majority of these will actually do exceedingly well, and with God's grace, they'll become unicorns. So I needed to understand what was very special about these companies. Well, one or two things that we found was either the promoter or the scientist or whatever had a huge sales and marketing bent. He was exceeding his abilities to connect with industry and with financial institutions at inception point was exceptional. So they managed to get into the radar screens and in front of those people who may or may not have understood the science, but they understood the person. So if team is the most important thing, these guys managed to do that quite well. Just a little bit more on some of these companies. Some of these values are already a little bit old, although my presentation is only a month old. Some of these companies, I believe in the very near future, you will hear of them in the news, will probably exceed $300-400 million US. More importantly, I think there are people overseas, such as Mahindra Rao, who have a keen interest to bring new therapies into India. So they're not a me too or second in line. These will be the first to market globally. Encure is one such initiative that Mahindra Rao has taken in using NK cells as CAR NK to deliver cancer therapy in India at a very affordable price. If things go well, you will find this therapy probably enter into phase 2 in the next 2-3 years. We talked about startups. It's important that at an early stage they start understanding financial planning, the funding that's required, the runway in front of them, the team structure, the fact that you should have the right person at the right place. The science may be great, but if your market connects or ability to interact with the market or industry is not so good, then you should start thinking like a corporate, which is put the right person in the right place. So one or two of the challenges that I've had with some startups, especially with the founder who's a scientist, is saying you can own 99% of the company, but let the CEO be somebody else who can actually make your company very successful. And the whole business of putting the company first and everybody else second is something that we need to imbibe perhaps a little bit more. Going to market, one assumes that this is a trivial process, but I must tell you it's exceedingly difficult to find how you can actually take a business, scale it, first maybe nationally and then internationally. So I think our friends need to understand that a little bit more. I said I spent a lot of time in sales and marketing, and I think they should start getting people who understand sales and marketing at an early on stage as far as their evolution is concerned. The last thing not to be sniffed at is the regulatory roadmaps and the difficulties associated with navigating these things. Again, I've been fortunate in being associated with companies that have actually had to traverse this particular path, and I know what it takes and how long it takes. All too often, we seem to underestimate some of these hurdles, and if you don't get them right, you probably run out of money and come to the end of your runway. So if we've understood this so well, one of my challenges then was how to put together a team who actually started addressing those hurdles or deficiencies that I saw in some of the startups and make them more successful. So Sonali was the CEO of Afana, perhaps the largest Japanese robotic firm over here in India. Jorgen, who's been involved with incurable diseases, is now one of his companies is going to be very successful. Suresh Ramu, some of you know, who's the MD for SiteCare. Farzan, also with SiteCare. Lalit Pai is the gentleman who's heading Encure. That's an interesting one. Perhaps we should spend a minute on that before we go to Mahindra and Johar. So when Mahindra set up Encure in India, he recognized that we had excellent talent, excellent scientists, and the ability to do a lot of this research and development. But he also recognized that at a very early stage, he needed somebody who could actually go out, face industry, and raise the money that Encure would require over the next 24, 36 months. Lalit was actually over in Dublin at the time. So through part of Ramu and Fazan's network, we managed to get hold of him and convince him to come back to India and head this particular organization. But I must also tell you, he's doing exceedingly well, and I think that company will go far. Mahindra Rao, as I mentioned earlier, I consider him to be, in the top 10, 15 specialists in that particular field. We also felt we needed some business sense, which said, what should we do at an early stage? What should we plan for? So I was fortunate enough to get Mr. Johar Gopal, who's the CEO of Featherlight. He's also over here in Bangalore, to perhaps start interacting with young companies, understanding their business plan, understanding their runway, allocation of funds, etc. Okay. What is our selection criteria? I think people or team must be the first gate that we have to cross, because it is their mindset, and how flexible it is and how pliable can they pivot at the right time when the market changes. That's one. Because Bio Combinator is not a VC, it's not a fund. Yes, we have money, and yes, we give money to startups. But the other thing that Bio Combinator does is it has a interactive operational role at the beginning. Our idea is to get involved at an operational level, and some founders may find this as interference. Okay, to bring those features and facets that I talked about earlier to bear on the young company. Our idea obviously is once we interact, we find the right people who then gets installed within the company so that we can get weaned off and move on to the next company. Bio Combinator in its first cohort will pick no more than 4 or 5 companies. Now, this people gate, we should clearly understand, which is what we try to explain to the startups. My success criteria, or no, I should say Bio Combinator's success criteria is if it picks 6 companies, 4 of them must be successful over the next 18 to 24 months. Success meaning they should be getting somewhere near Series A over that period of time to be able to raise money. So we put some valuation figures, but that's what we want to do. If that is understood by the startup that this is what we need to bring to the market, then we can have a look at the market itself, what the market focus is, is the timing correct, is the positioning correct? We can do that with them. Unfortunately, a lot of people at a startup level believe that money is the most important thing, and if they have money, they can do everything. I find that that actually comes last. We've successfully found money for organizations that have needed it. So if money gets linked to milestones as opposed to asking for a lump of money, we try to preserve the founder's equity by not taking money or raising money too early, or if we raise money, to make sure that we raise just enough so that we can reach the next milestone and no more than that, because otherwise you're just keeping money in the bank and that makes absolutely no sense. We were involved recently with MBAG, which is where this thing started from. And I'd mentioned some of these figures just a few minutes ago. 3,200 companies applied, got sifted down to 300. That's when we got involved, along with many other people at CCAM. That's after sort of a Zoom call and some Q&A. And we've sifted them down to about 60. I must say that 60 was done by a whole panel, okay, and on some which BC was not present. We think we will pick our 6 from the 300, not the 10 top finalists, because we believe some of our assets that we have are more applicable to some of the other companies, which for whatever reason is not in the last 10 or 15 companies that CCAMP or NBEC is picking. So we think we have an idea as to who these companies are, and we think we've understood some of the people and some of the psyche, although we haven't decided who the companies will be, but we have a short list that we think we'll pick from. The last bit that I've written over there is, and I didn't want that line on there, because this just confuses things. We can bring money to bear in startups if they comprehend everything else that we've said, and they fully understand that this is a symbiotic relationship, that it is imperative for us that they succeed, because our success criteria, as I said, I need to hit 65, 70% hit rate. If we do that, it will effectively demonstrate where I started from, that it's not the talent that's always been there, it's not the institutes, I think they're fantastic. It's just the ingredients or the mix at the start in bringing some people with a little bit of experience for a finite period of time, so that we align the startup in the right direction till they find their own legs and start running. I believe if we do that, forget about our money. I think many other financial institutions will start running after them. Again, those half a dozen companies I mentioned, they don't go for money anymore. People come to them to give their money. So that's why I put money at a very low value. That really was the end of my presentation. I wanted to give a lot more time for any Q&As and for any depth in any one of these charts that I put up there.
Thank you, Mr. Vora, for the presentation and the talk. So we can open the floor for questions and answers. So any participant who has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself, introduce and ask the question to Mr. Vora. Hello, any question?
This is Prasad here. I just have one question. Could you also share some lessons from failures? It will be interesting to hear.
Yes. I have to be very careful that I don't mention any names. About, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, we found this one particular company in the agro field that developed a technology which a lot of us, and when I say a lot of us, I mean the science people on my team thought it was breathtaking. It had the ability to revolutionize the logistics involved as far as agro is concerned, and also how agro worked as far as NPK is concerned. Over a period of time, we felt that that company had a window of opportunity to become huge. I don't think it's anybody's fault, and I think at that time the whole thought process of BC wasn't born enough. We should have said upfront that please allow us to help you in 1 or 2 areas where it's not science that you need, it's the go-to market that you understand. Unfortunately, I think we were unsuccessful in convincing them that certain changes needed to be made. But brilliant science, brilliant people, something that India desperately still needs, in my opinion. But and it didn't hit the heights that I think it could have done, okay, or we think it could have done. That's because I see the failure as ours. We were unable to convince them that a slightly different strategy and team structures should be in place. So, but a brilliant organization like this, we have several cases where there was another organization which made some brilliant technology. Certainly in the COVID era, it could have excelled itself because of what it did. But the whole arena of sales and marketing is not fully appreciated, or the difficulties associated with actually going to market and making market connects. And when these windows close, then it's a little bit too late to do that. So when I talked about earlier about India and what's new, well, the next 5-10 years, what the pundits say that India will do, the question becomes is that's all good and fine. What are the verticals or industries that are going to propel this astronomical growth? Now, my view is I think life sciences / biotech is going to be one of them. I've already said that it's not a shortage of money or smart talent or indeed institutes, and I think we have some of the finest in the world. The question is, how do we synergize all of this and people understand that at the end of the day, science must translate, the companies must make money, they must be successful. So when I relate to the IT era, I said I remember because I walked through it. the names which are international names today, at that particular time ran a little startup, but their visions to take on board the various elements required for a business to be successful. And that's what I call corporate thinking. I worked for a corporate for many years, and the advantage of a corporate is it's the corporate that's important and the business of the corporate, not the CEO or the CTO or whatever. This is where we must open up and start thinking big. So wherever that's not happened, and I said it's difficult on a webinar over a cup of coffee, I can discuss many more things with you. But there are several cases where I just feel it's sad that such brilliant young people in such brilliant science have not achieved the heights that they should have done. Okay. So, yes, I mean, without said naming any names, those are two organizations there, and there's a few more that, in my opinion, could have done very well. But I think your question should be looked at differently. Let me ask you the question instead. If I've got many institutes who've got the best of the best, are you satisfied with the number of people who actually attain escape velocity and become $50 million, $100 million, $200 million valuation? Are you happy with those numbers? If the answer is no, and if you accept what I'm saying, that the science is good, the people are good, India is good, then why not? Okay. So I think if we want to do a post-mortem on some companies, we should do it behind closed doors and find out what impulse should have been applied at a much earlier stage. But yes, there are several examples that we've come across. By the way, and we had actually invested in some of them. Unfortunately, we had to walk away because we felt that they needed a structure which they weren't listening to. So now to circumvent that, what Biocombinator is doing is now we've made a team of people, and very shortly we one or two more people joining us at core level, and one of them will be a CSO, where they can spend time with them along with somebody from the financial sector and make sure that the plans of go to market are right, whether it's going to the financial market, whether it's going to the industrial market or whatever. So I hope that answers your question, although unfortunately I said I can't give you the level of detail that you may want.
Thank you very much, Ashok, for sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vora. So we have another question from Shreya from ICER Pune. She's asking for software as medical device product. What kind of licensing and approvals one needs in India, especially if one has a FOSS framework in mind?
I think when you talk about software, it's a field in its own, but this is I'll try to answer with the limited knowledge I have. And a lot of people have started to use AI and ML in some of the software to do predictive analysis. My understanding is that the regulatory issues cut in if you allow that system or software to actually predict that somebody is not well. So I think they call it a false positive or a false negative, where the machine has to say, please refer this case to a human. So you can circumvent some of the regulatory hurdles when you're using software to do some of these things. I don't understand your software very well, but we're very pleased to discuss it offline. We have one or two people who can perhaps advise you on the regulatory path as far as software is concerned. Am I answering your question?
Shreya, you can, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, yeah, so as far as software plus them being in a medical system is concerned, so I wanted to know like what kind of approvals one need, and if someone has a free and open source software framework in their mind, how one should go about it. So yeah.
It depends again. I think yeah, we have some very nice associates who understand the regulatory systems very well. But from my knowledge, as long as there is a barrier between what your software is predicting, I think if that's the right word, and
Okay.
the recipient of that information, if there's a barrier between that, which you then either go through a caregiver or a medical officer or so forth, I think there are safeguards and I said, this needs to be checked, but this is my understanding. That's easy to do. So again, one needs to understand fully what are you going to do with the software, where are you going to apply it, who is it going to interact with. Uh, so one would need to
So if
understand.
a software that a doctor would be using. So in that case, the doctor would have a control over the predictions or the results of the software. So it's not directly a patient. The pipeline includes clinicians in their assessments. So
Yeah,
a
I think
software of that kind.
I think there are several software assists that currently exist. Uh, if you need to understand how applicable this particular product is, again, be very pleased to put you in touch with the one or two people who run medical
Sure.
institutions to understand what the scalability and how big is the use case. So I said, one will need to understand more, but certainly you can connect with me and I will gladly put you in touch with people who can advise you better so that you have a clearer understanding as to how you navigate your startup.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya, for the question. Any more questions from the audience?
Hi, Devanshi. I have a question. Pranita.
Hi. Go ahead. Pranita.
Yeah. So, I have a question about, one of the slide mentioned about the significance of team, how essential that is to take anything or drive anything forward. And most of the time you mentioned CCAM, then we are at IIT Bombay, and we see a lot of research coming out from the lab where the team is basically initially is the faculty member and some of the researchers or research staff who is involved in that. Now, if you could give us some suggestions or share your experiences, how this team should evolve at different stages, right? From lab scale POC to something where you are running pilot or validating, you are in regulatory process, you are doing some of the, you're doing early sales, and then you are scaling up. And there are people who are working on deep tech technologies. So if you could also talk about something about that how the team should evolve, when are the, what are the right times you should have onboard people, and, how do you do that? How do you strategize that? If you could talk about that.
Sure. We were talking about what was different about companies that today are successful versus those companies where I believe the scientist and the science is as good. I'll talk about one because I know the individual exceedingly well, and I'm sure he won't mind me sharing his path to success. So we got involved with them about 6-7 years ago when they were still doing, as you said, lab level research and an excellent scientist on board. And when they first came out, they were looking for some, I don't know, 40, 50,000, maybe $200,000, a very small amount of money. The important bit was they knew exactly what they were going to do with that money and where they needed to deploy it. And that's because the founder himself, while he's the CEO of the company, the science was actually developed by the CSO in a large part. But he knew the relationship that he needed to have with the scientists and the market. So if you fast forward 7 odd years, they're worth a lot of money today. Okay. So they understood what they had to navigate. And by the way, this is in the cell and gene area. So they had to go through regulatory, they had to raise money through financial institutions who don't fund unless you're at Series B or Series C. Yeah. So, but you need to raise the money. So you needed to have a relationship with these people in order to get the early money. You needed to have absolutely top-notch scientists. I believe his company is just either first or second in the world. It's in the top three. So we needed world-class scientists. So we managed to actually create that ecosystem of having science, having financial institution connectivity, working with small investors, presenting a case to everybody that where this was going. Of course, he was dealing with an incurable disease, which is even nicer as far as the social impact is concerned. It was a well-rounded presentation at a very early stage. I mean, they've evolved a lot more today. That's a separate issue. But it is that need that if you're just the CSO, and by the way, I know a lot of excellent science and scientists who come out of the campus that I sit on. The question then becomes is the possession or the possessiveness of the discovery that's made. Once you then clearly understand, am I doing science for the sake of science? Or do I want to take it out to the market, be profitable? And sometimes that's a dirty word with many researchers. And hopefully it also has a social impact, and especially if you look at MCure, if it brings down the cost of a cancer therapy, I'll be a very, very happy man because most of the therapies are very expensive and out of the reach of middle-class people. So, in answering your question, the need for you to have an interface with people who can help you either on a full-time basis or preferably on a full-time basis to navigate those areas as to how you will take your science to market. Is it applicable? Which is the industry? Can you meet the industry? Can you associate with the industry and modify or pivot as you may have to, with industry? So some of these paths, maybe 7 years, 5 years, 10 years, but that's not relevant. As long as you have that visibility with industry and the financial institutions, and you make progress in line with the thought process that this will be a financially viable organization that you're building, and that you are quite ready to put the right people in the right positions within the company, whether the title be CEO, CFO, or whatever. And how do you meet those people? I mentioned CCAMP a couple of times, and forgive me for that, but I find it, and I'm sure many other institutions are the same, I find it a fantastic place where I meet all sorts of people. And now that industry is also starting to make its rounds over there, it's not difficult, in my opinion, to deal with institutes, whether it's IIT, Mumbai, or some of the other, where there are some brilliant people who have different verticals. There are many MBAs there who may want to do an intern with some organizations and understand how they can bring those facets to bear. You can get good people as long as your thought processes are there, and then bring those people in and let them do what they're good at. So I call it corporized thinking, but it's a step at a time. So, Patrina, if I got to know one or two of your startups and said, this is where it is, getting the people, those sorts of people is not the problem. Listening to them may be the issue.
Thank you.
We've
Thank you
got
for
several
summarizing.
organizations on that.
Great. However, like as you mentioned, getting these people may not be issue. Startup should have a strategy, like how they will be retaining these people, and then as you say, listen to them and then have a plan for the vision and vision for company and all. Thank you for summarizing.
But just let me finish it off for you. We've hired people into companies. Now that's the wrong word, hired. we've actually brought in other founders because the task that is required of them is the task of the day to take the company to the next level. So there's nothing wrong with that. In bringing people into that job, and there's nothing wrong with them becoming a part of the team or the founder or whatever. If your vision is large, then one shouldn't be worried about somebody's taken some equity or whatever. Okay, the people you should worry about the most are the ones who only give you money, because I keep telling you, and I'm sure there's a few people who are VCs who won't agree with me, but trust me, that you can find good people working in a good team. A little bit more difficult.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranita, for the question. Mr. Vora, we have another question from Shivram Srinivasan. He's saying, we at Swim Biopharma are involved in development of APIs and biosimilars. Today, we only have lab scale equipment. We have orders from our clients for our APIs, for which we need production scale equipment. Can Bio Combinator help us get machinery funding of about 50 plus?
Did I hear the word string bio correctly?
Swim Biopharma.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard another name. Again, he's talking about money. I would be pleased to see what his business case is. Any financial institution, that's why it's changing. That's why it's been so difficult up until today. Anybody who invests money, if you purely see them as money, then he will want to understand on that platform, fine, what are you going to give to me? What are my risks? What are my returns? Because I can put it in a bank and get 6%, I can do it over here and get 15%, etc., etc. And that's exactly the algorithm one should not use, because you will always lose unless you can guarantee the outcome, which is difficult. Okay. So, but can we find the money? The answer is, if the business case is right and if the involvement is correct, I don't think it's a big issue. As I said, I never consider, by the way, getting money to a party as anything very clever. If the business case is right, it's easy to find the money. I'm sure there's several people who do it. But again, even if we don't interact with them, one of the things that Bio Combinator, and I'm very pleased to say that my colleagues have also agreed, is we will help any startup with no strings attached, whatever connects they want us to make, we'll gladly make. We are not saying just for those few that we're going to work with closely, we'll help, not at all. Those 6 are my pilot, or Bio Combinator's pilot. But anybody else wanting any sort of assistance, if we have the ability to deliver it, we'll be pleased to.
Thank you, Mr. Vora. Hope that answers your question, Shivram. Any other questions from the audience? Please feel free to unmute and ask away.
I just want to emphasize to everyone what Mr. Vora just said. Although there's a limited set of people that they intimately interact with in terms of advising closely and also funding. Any entrepreneur is open to reach out to them, and they're happy to make any connects that you may need, whether it's a funder or any other value-added advisor or connect. So just please keep that. So since we're waiting for others to raise their hands, Mr. Vora, I want to ask you something. We notice that companies coming out of India, entrepreneurs, many of them are first-time entrepreneurs, because these are green shoots of entrepreneurship in India, particularly in deep tech, biotech, and so on. And we see an India-centric view of the market. They look at India as the market, whereas the same companies could be making a lot better margin selling outside of India as well. Do you see that in your work? And is there a significant reorientation that you have to do to be able to say that, hey, look, the world is your market, And obviously India is part of it. What's your view on that?
I would like to first say that I want the Indian entrepreneur and the Indian institutes to understand that we have everything that's required for us to become global and provide products and services with IP globally. This is why I see this as a revolution. I think this time around, we've got highly qualified people, tremendous research, tremendous institutes, and we have the money. So, and the world is looking for solutions, and nobody can produce it at the cost or price, whatever you want to say, that we can. What would be nice in order to go global quickly is if we can start, and I think India has attained that credibility globally, if at a very early stage we formed starting associations, you can call them joint ventures, whatever you want, okay? And that way we can have a partnership where it's both ways. We can do stuff in India, but we can also take our product to market globally. So if I've understood your question correctly, I would like in this new world to actually have a completely new set of thinking, both for our funders, both for our startups, both for our institutes, okay, and perhaps for the government, although that's a tall order. We are good. And we've been investing for years in our institutes and people, okay? Today, and we have the IT world to thank for it, the Indians have a totally different perception, and I think the last 10 years have seen the Indian come of age. Now what we need to do is this huge reservoir of people that we've got is to actually channelize them and start delivering products and services globally, okay? And I think we have that capacity. I hope I'm addressing what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, I get it right. Someone, any other questions, anyone, or we can go ahead and wrap up the webinar?
I think if there are any questions, I mean, will you be sharing the contact information where people can reach out? Obviously, use on
We can
LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll be happy to connect to Mr. Vora if anyone has any questions, to reach out to us. And we'll also be making the recording of this webinar available on our YouTube channel in case you want to revisit any of the points. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. And thank you, Mr. Vora, for your time and sharing all the knowledge and insights with us.
You've been very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vora.
Thanks.
Thank you, audience.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.